You having trouble
Yeah, I'm having
sharing your
trouble.
screen?
Yeah.
What do you see the share button at the bottom?
Yeah, I clicked it, but I'm trying to uh allow the Zoom app to have access to like screen sharing because my laptop has some privacy
Well,
settings.
while you do that, Nick, do you want to just tell us a bit how you got into composting?
Sure. So I always liked nature. When I was younger, my parents had put me into scouts, and from there, I started learning more about the environment. And it wasn't until later on when I got into high school and I got in my biology class, we started learning about decomposers. Later on that summer, I went to visit my cousin in Florida, um, and she showed me a compost bin, and I said that's sort of a pretty easy thing to do. Started doing that at home around what, ninth or 10th grade, and I've just been composting ever since. Every summer I came home from university, I kept practicing, like just trying to make a recipe, and it stuck. Yeah, like
Nice. And that, sorry, go on.
there are some things that as I dive deeper into composting itself, I learned that the Bahamas or even the world has a serious waste problem, especially Caribbean islands. We import so much, but there aren't proper ways to either like recycle or reuse or dispose of our waste in an efficient manner. So I found that composting was a relatively quick solution to some of the problems we have in terms of waste management.
Right. Would you say it's easy to get into composting? I know we're probably gonna share the video in a few minutes, but until we get that going, do you think it's easy to start composting? Like, do you think it's very difficult? Are there a lot of hurdles to it, or can I get some of my organics today, put them in a bag, and start composting? Like, is it that easy?
I wouldn't say it's that easy. I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, it's probably like a 5, maybe a 6. Just because with composting, there are a few things that you have to have, and you have to have a lot. You have to have a lot of greens and browns, as you'll see in the video, and you have to be comfortable with rotting food waste or certain smells, even though the type of composting that we use is, or I use, is aerobic composting. So it involves adding a lot of oxygen to the pile. It takes a lot of work and a lot more time than you'd actually think.
So you just mentioned aerobic composting. Is there another type?
Yeah, there's anaerobic composting, which is a lot slower. You don't have, it's not as involved of a process, so you don't have to flip your pile to introduce oxygen, but it does create methane and it does smell very bad. So typically most people say composts take about 6 to 8 months to create. And at that point, you just leave it there. You just keep piling things on. With me, as you'll see in the video, and I think I just got it to work. As you see in the video, where was I going with that?
Well, we could just jump right into the video.
Yeah.
If you want to.
Yeah. Everything I'm about to say is in the video. So.
All right. Sounds good.
Hello, everybody. My name is Nicholas Fox. And soil. That is my company where I collect compost and execute permaculture designs. But today, we're going to be talking about my favorite thing to do, composting. We will be talking about the importance of composting to the environment, the importance of composting for your garden, for your trees, for your plants, and the importance of composting for your mind and your body. But before we start,
I just want to show that I have on the proper gear or some gear to compost properly. Right now I have on boots. You can also wear these waterproof boots, especially when you're getting dirty and you have large compost piles. It's a very good thing to have. I wear gloves, long pants, an extra shirt, and these are like work clothing. So anytime I'm working with compost and raw food material, I want to be protected and make sure I'm not dirty in my clothing because this is a dirty job. And I have on a hat. It's like 7:30 p.m. now in the Bahamas, but it's important to protect your face from the UV rays and just to make sure you stay cool. So, but before we start composting, we're gonna be stretching and mobilizing the shoulders. And you don't have to use a PVC pipe. You can use a shovel, you can use a stick, you can use anything. Just make sure you're balanced. And what you wanna do is you're gonna take your shoulder, your arms, you wanna just bring it up to your head, back down for 10. You could also do some windmills, just to open up those shoulders. You can see the waste we'll be dealing with today. So I have some brewery grain from one of our local breweries, and I have some food waste from my kitchen. These are both considered nitrogen waste. So in composting, you have green waste and brown waste, and your brown waste is mostly leaves, paper, cardboard, or anything dry. Full of carbon, it's very carbon rich. And your food waste, as you can see all the flies all around it, they can't wait to get on it. Your food waste consists of grains, fruits and vegetables, maybe vegan food items, eggshells, so on and so forth. So carbon and nitrogen must be balanced in your compost pile. There's usually a ratio of 25:1 or 31:1. Yes. Yeah. So now that you understand that, we're going to talk about what these tools do and what they're for. See, composting is just a biological process of decomposition. And most biological processes have mostly the same rules. Composting is no different. When you have your balanced carbon and nitrogen ratios, you want to make sure that both carbon and nitrogen are, both products or both resources are evenly coating each other. So the grain that we have here and the food waste that we have here has to be crushed to create more surface area to interact with the carbon in the compost pile. Something like this edge trimmer. What is this? Oh, I don't know. Something like this edge trimmer is perfectly fine and available probably at your own hardware store. When I compost, I have a custom-made composting tool called the chopper. When you're composting and you're collecting your food waste, I find that the 5-gallon bucket is one of the best options to compost or to store your food waste in. As you can see, it's been completely crushed to a pulp. It's a very sturdy and durable bucket. It also comes with one of these plastic seals that locks air and, most importantly, pests out. If you have an open air system that you store your food waste in, it will start to decay, and the smell of the decay is going to bring odors, and those odors will bring pests. That's not what we want when we compost. So having a 5-gallon bucket that's sealable. I find that it works best for most situations, especially in business or home. And they're pretty cheap, but they offer a lot of space. That's why I think a 5-gallon bucket is one of the best to use when you're storing food waste. Here we have an unfinished compost pile. For the sake of this video, I have risked my compost pile just a little bit to show you what it looks like. Whenever you are composting, you do not want to have your pile exposed. This waste here is considered nitrogen waste. This is the same brewery waste or grain that I was showing you in the bucket earlier. When you leave nitrogen waste on top of your compost, it starts to break down and it attracts pests, rodents, flies, and other animals. And that may be all fine and well for you, but some people don't like that. We're going to give you a sneak peek in this compost pile. All the flies are angry. There are layers. See, remember what I talked about earlier with the surface area? It's very important that you layer your compost pile with the adequate amount of carbon to nitrogen in those ratios. This ensures that there is proper coverage, there is proper mixing to get a homogeneous mix of your carbon and nitrogen elements. That waste that we had earlier, we're just going to go ahead and dump it. On the pile. This is more brewery grain, and because it's so fine, it doesn't need to be crushed. Every last drop. Now that that's done, you have your grains and all of your other composting mix. You just want to make sure it's leveled. And the reason I like to make sure my compost pile is level is so that there's an even distribution of heat once the pile starts to break down. These are called exudates. Right.
Sorry, everybody. That was not supposed to be in the video.
The reason composting is so important is because it helps to bolster that environment that your plant is in. See, your plant is in something called soil, and soil itself is alive. When you have soil, there are many different microorganisms from protists to arthropods, archaea, fungi, bacteria. These are all in the soil, and these all play an important role in creating things for your tree or your plant that it needs. Some of these things break down rock minerals to put into simpler forms for your tree to take up. Some of these things break down sugars into simple sugars for your tree to then use. Some of these things protect your tree from disease. This is what compost is. Compost is a large part of what soil is. When you see a tree in the forest and there's a layer of leaves around its base, that tree is creating its own soil. It's mulching its surroundings so that things will break it down. Fungi will start to come up out of the soil to break these leaves down, and then the fungi will produce products for the tree to take up, and the tree can continue to produce leaves for the fungi to eat. And it's a whole process of symbiosis that's happening here. And that's why it's important to compost. Not only is it important for the trees, it's important for our environment. I know for the Bahamas itself, we import over 300 million tons a year. And 60% of that is food waste or compostable waste. And all of that is going to the landfill where it's not being used as a proper resource. So I think that my mission with this company is to get the entire Bahamas to start composting more so we have resources to grow our own food and to protect the environment. When food waste goes to the landfill, it produces methane. When you're composting, you're producing a fraction of that through methane or CO2, and it's very small, especially if you're aerobic composting. And what aerobic composting is, it's continuously introducing oxygen into that pile, into that carbon and nitrogen, because the bacteria and the fungi that break this pile down, they need oxygen to continuously break that pile down. Without oxygen, they will die. And now your pile is anaerobic and it smells terrible. Ooh, I don't have much time. The mosquitoes are starting to come out. So now that we understand why and how we turn our compost piles, let's talk about what is there to talk about.
And that's the video, everybody. I hope it was informative. I hope it was captivating, and I hope you learned something from it.
Thanks, Nicholas. Did you want to add anything to the video, or did that basically explain everything?
Yeah, I would like to add a few things to the video. That part about exudates, I had gotten that mixed up. Exudates are what the tree emits. It's like a sugar that allows fungi to come in, and basically they have an exchange, and the exudates are what feeds them. So I just want to clear that up, so I don't want to be providing misinformation. And yeah, that's it. That's about it.
Okay, well, thanks for clearing that up. This for the next, I guess, 15 to 20 minutes, I think we would open it up to questions for if anybody had questions about the video. But before that, I just had a few questions of my own to ask you.
Sure.
How do you think composting is, or why do you think composting is important when it comes to planting trees?
So when you compost, whether that be taking from a tree or providing to a tree, compost is rich or full of diverse microorganisms, especially when you have specific things that you use in your compost, whether it be manure or seaweed or various types of plants. All of these things have specific microorganisms that are either in them or that break them down. And when you have trees that have a diverse group of microorganisms, that then opens up the ecosystem around the roots to receive certain benefits. I know for some trees, like most coastal trees, they have microorganisms around their root hairs that helps them to be more salt resistant. So that's one example as to why composting is good for trees. It also helps a tree to acclimate to a new environment much faster than if you were to just use normal soil, because one, the compost is full of these microorganisms that are rapidly changing that environment or that microclimate around the roots of the tree. Compost is also good for water retention and drainage, because it creates, people use the word humus or humus-like material, and it absorbs water and it retains water quite well. One of the tests that we use for compost to see if the compost is saturated enough is called a drip test. And you grab a handful of compost and squeeze it, and if one drop of water comes out, that means it's properly saturated. And most times compost will only have as much water as it needs to feed those microorganisms or to hold our water around the soil. So that's why that's a few of the reasons why composting is good for trees.
Nice. Well, thanks for that. Emma Lewis has a question in the chat. She says, what is the benefit of nitrogen for the soil? Could you explain that part again?
The benefit of nitrogen for the soil. Yes. So nitrogen itself in the soil is one of the few nutrients that the plant itself needs. But I guess in terms of composting, nitrogen would act more like a fuel to fuel the breakdown of the carbon. And if you don't have a proper ratio of nitrogen, you will run out of fuel and your carbon product won't break down as fast.
So is
Does
that
answer your
related
question?
to the ratio of greens and browns? Because I know
Yes.
you touched on that, but I guess could you tie that into?
Sure. So when you have, I use a lower ratio than most people, and that's why you saw me pause in the video, because most people say 30-1, and that is a little slow for me.
What
Because
does 30
that's
to 1 mean?
so there should be 30 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. I use a ratio of 26 parts carbon to 1 part nitrogen. And they have compost calculators online that will show you the volume or whatever measurement of material that you are using, so you can get an accurate count for your ratios.
So why do you use 26 instead of 30? Why do you use a
Because
lower ratio?
when I get a lot, since I collect food waste, I do get a lot of food waste, and it breaks down a lot. It breaks down quickly. And I flip my pile. This is a part of my process. Everybody has a different process. But when I create compost, I use a 3-day flip method, and I break my compost. My compost is ready in 28 days because of the recurring flipping. So since I'm constantly introducing oxygen, and there's a lot more nitrogen than a normal pile. The carbon resources get broken down much quicker than a normal pile. So it makes a much quicker compost. It doesn't smell as much, but it is a lot hotter. And a lot of people aren't able to manage such a hot pile. If you're using centigrade, my compost probably stays at 60 to 70 centigrade, or around 60 to 65 degrees centigrade for 2 weeks, and it starts to go down. Most people have their compost staying at that temperature for 3 days, and you will have to constantly monitor it, because at that point, if you don't, those microbes will die, and you'll have an anaerobic pile.
So the next question is from Jamila Falik, one of the ambassadors. She says, what are some of the uses of compost? And then she said, you seem to be passionate about what you do. What inspired you to do this work? So I guess you could take the first one, and then we could come back to the second question.
Okay, and they're in the chat, right? Okay. So
Yeah, so yeah, you
compost,
got it?
yeah. Compost is an ingredient for soil. It is used to help your plants grow. It's a replacement for fertilizer, because what it does is it allows the microorganisms in the compost to extract the nutrients that it needs from the soil itself. Depending on the recipe you use for your compost, you can have compost that has different NPK values, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium values. But other uses of compost can probably help your tree to fight off diseases. And it's not a medicine, it's not a cure for your tree, but it is more as like a defense mechanism. Like if you take vitamin C off it, the more microorganisms that are the higher count of good microorganisms that have to compete for nutrients, have to help the tree out. This basically pushes out the bad microbes or the bad organisms for your tree. So it does have a good benefit. for your tree. So that's 2 uses. Another thing there is called compost tea, which I also create. And this is taking compost and aerating it in a tank of water. So with a lot of sugar. And the sugar acts as a fuel for the microbes to thrive in. And what that compost tea does is that it causes a lot of microbes to constantly reproduce in this water without the solid material of the compost. And you can use that as a very concentrated solution to add to your soil. And it has the same effect as compost, adding that microbiology to the soil to then bolster your tree's health and the relationship it has with the soil that surrounds it. So those are the uses of compost. Some people also use it as a foliar spray. So they spray it on the leaves of their plants. And what that does is most people theorize, I haven't used it to spray on the leaves of my plants. What it does is it does the same thing. It basically outcompetes the bad biology. So fungi, microbes, they compete basically. And what inspired me to do this work? Well, I never really wanted to be inside, having like an office job, and I composting was one of the only things that I had started doing when I was outside. I didn't really go outside much if it wasn't for sports or anything else, and I found that it was just very relaxing and calming. I didn't get to talk about the benefits of just being outside and composting for your mind and your body, but once you warm up and you do all of that correctly, it's almost like a small workout, but at the same time it clears your mind, because you're watching the things that we normally throw away break down into a resource that we now use to grow food. So it almost shows the cycle of life and death, and it's a very humbling thing to watch. How do you apply compost to a growing tree to protect it from sickness or treat it? What is the technique? Okay, so you have your tree. This is the diameter of its trunk, and then you want to go about 6 inches to a foot away from that, depending on the size of its trunk, and you want to dig not too deep, maybe 2 to 3 inches deep, and apply compost around that ring. You can even do it around the base of the tree, but you want to make sure you dig a little bit and cover that in compost, and then cover that compost in mulch. Either if you have dried leaves, that works. If you have shredded newspaper or shredded cardboard, that works. But the reason you have to cover it in mulch is because, unlike us, microorganisms do not have skin that protects them from UV rays and heat. They are very, very sensitive to light. They cannot survive. So once you have that covering of mulch, you now have a cool and shady place where your microbes, your fungi, and other microorganisms can now start to thrive. And since they are used to composting, that ring is going to start being broken down. That mulch is going to start being broken down. It's going to continuously add fuel for your tree. But sickness or treating your plant, that comes from knowing what type of disease it is, because compost is not a cure-all. It's not a cure-all, but compost will help the health of your tree.
So next question for you, Nick. People say fertilizer or artificial fertilizer is not good. Do you agree with that sentiment? And also, could compost be like a substitute for fertilizer? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that inorganic fertilizers and the whole industry is bad, especially when you consider that it's being shipped around the world. So that's a lot. That's another extra cost that countries shouldn't have to pay when we all have these resources that are literally at our feet that we could use to bolster our soil. Mm, is that your question, Chaz?
Yeah, that was my question.
You said artificial fertilizers or synthetic fertilizer. I don't condone or use synthetic fertilizers. I don't like I the whole reason and the things that they use to make those are bad, especially on islands like the Bahamas, where we have a lens. We have very shallow landmass, and we have a lot of well water. And once the fertilizer leaches off, that can easily go and pollute our drinking water, and it doesn't really help your tree to grow proper roots. So another thing that trees do is they keep soil, they keep soil anchored to the ground. So when we have tropical storms, the storms don't carry the soil and the trees and our homes away. The trees are not only a windbreak but anchors for the soil. And when you add fertilizer, it's like giving a tree drugs. It's like feeding a tree like something very bad for it. It in the interim, in the very short term, it's great because it's readily available nutrients, and the tree does not have to go far, does not have to get its roots very far for to get the nutrients that it needs. But it's going to start depending on that cycle over and over and over again until it can't do anything else, and it eventually will die out, or you will pollute the entire area around your tree. What was the second part of the question? Hello?
The second part of my question was that if compost could substitute for fertilizer, which I think you kind of answered already.
Okay, yeah.
So there's another question in the chat. So do you have printed resources for making compost tea and tools needed for making the simple compost? I would love to hear more on the therapeutic benefits of composting, as it appears super beneficial for soil and us. So I would say for the first one, let's say, can you summarize the composting process in like a minute or two, like the steps, and
For
then
compost and compost, yeah, I
for
can do that.
compost and then compost tea. Yeah.
Okay, so compost tea, you need a container, does not have to be big, and you need some form of porous cheesecloth, pillow, what is it, pillow sheet, and you need some form of air stone or anything that bubbles to produce oxygen, like what you use for your fish tank. And you take your compost and you put it in the bag in your cheesecloth or whatever permeable material, semi-permeable material, and you submerge it in water. Make sure the water is dechlorinated, and you put in your air stone, and you let that sit for maybe 2 days at most, and you have ready to use compost tea. Compost tea can be diluted 10 parts to 1, so 5 gallons is 50 gallons diluted, and it still has the same effect. It goes a long way. It does not last very long outside of the air stone. If it's not being bubbled, you have about a week of wiggle room until the microbial count goes down and you have a less superior, you have an inferior product. Composting itself, some form of isolated area outside that's at least 50 feet away from your house, just in case, or in the event that you have pests and rodents, you don't want them to trace your material to your home. You need some form of airtight container to store your food in, and access to grass or dried leaf clippings. So, and once you start collecting that, I would say for up to 2 to 3 weeks at most, that's how long you should be collecting resources for and adding them in layers. Start layering them. I would say for every 1/3 of food waste, you have 2/3 of brown waste, and you layer them up for at least 2 weeks. After 2 weeks, after 2 to 3 weeks, I do not recommend adding to the pile, because just like you bake or create a lasagna or a cake, you don't turn the oven on, put your lasagna noodle and so on and so forth while it's baking. You want everything to start cooking at once, you know? Once you have, after those 3 weeks are done, you're gonna leave the pile alone for 4 days so it can start to heat up and break down. And then you turn that pile every 3 days. And that's it. For every 3 days for about a month, and you should have compost. Don't forget the drip test. Take your compost, handful, squeeze it. And if water comes out and it just starts to drain, or 1 drop of water, it's great. If there's no water, take your hose and water it. If there's too much water, add more brown material, but just know that it's going to cause your pile to slow down. Now,
And I guess the easiest way, Nick, to get it, to figure it out, is just to start it, right? Just to try. And
yeah, just go ahead. Just go ahead. Don't wait for it. Every piece of food you save starting today does not go in the landfill. And you are, even if it doesn't work, you are enriching, you're making a richer environment that you live in for the organisms around you. Some tree, some animal will be happy that you have food waste composting. And even if it doesn't fully work, but it does break down, you can still use that. It just won't be compost, but it will be fuel for plants. But just try.
yeah, just go for it.
The first few composts I've made, I had a 55-gallon drum, and I did not know anything about composting. I just knew that we were saving the planet when I was young. And you put the food waste in, and over time, yeah, there was like 50 roaches in the bin, but that's because I wasn't turning it, and I didn't know that you have to have a proper ratio. It just sat there, but it broke down into soil. It broke down, and that taught me something like patience as well, because you just have to keep trying, and eventually it works. It works. I remember the first time we grew lettuce with my compost, and it was just like, yeah, 3 months of hard work in the sun, getting bite up by bugs, but I could make food for my family to eat. And that was fulfilling to me, knowing that I saved things from the garbage, and my mom and I could have food to eat. We could make salads. So that's one of the things that really kept me going, was that, one day everybody could be doing this. Everybody's going to be composting, and everybody's going to have some way to feed themselves. You don't have to go to your 9 to 5 and worry about making money to go to the food store to buy food, when you could just allot, I don't know, 30 minutes a day before you go to work.
I have a little question.
Sure.
Right. So in Tobago, we have 2 golf courses. One in particular is very close to where I live and where my personal garden is. Now, we have a practice every month or possibly 2 months where we take the dried grass from the golf course that they heap up in bundles, and we pack that onto the back of a van and we take it up to the garden, right?
Nice.
What
Yeah.
do you suggest is thing to mix that with, if anything at all, when you have it compacted like that?
Well, if it's compact, like you mean like compacted, almost like a brick, almost like a bale?
Well, it eventually ends up looking something like that, because when we take, it's several of us would just take the piles from on the golf course of the cuttings of the grass, and we would basically pile it onto the of the van, and then we would kind of bring it in one go to the garden, and then we kind of section it off, and it ends up being like clumped together sections of, or separate sections of the hay, of the dried grass. Do you
So-
think we should mix that with something before we apply it to the soil, or should we just leave it as is?
So there's two different things. Right now, it sounds like you're using the grass as a mulch. That'll break
Correct.
down.
Yes, as mulch. Yes,
If you don't have to mix it if it's a mulch because it's doing its job. And if you do mix it, you're creating an environment of decay, and that could potentially harm your plants. So if you're going to use it for compost, I recommend, if you have that much grass, manures, any farm that has manure that they are willing to give away,
right.
or any coffee shops that have excess coffee grains or grounds,
Right.
those are very, very, very high in nitrogen.
Okay.
And that grass,
Question.
yeah.
Aside from the mulch, in terms of growing cocoa, because it seems to be that in Tobago we have a resurgence of interest in growing cocoa.
Mhm.
All right. So a lot of estate owners who have private lands, they are opting to have cocoa grown, or at least do some small scale cocoa cultivation. What do you think is the best composting method to use specifically for cocoa and the cultivation of cocoa?
Well, I don't know much about cocoa itself. I don't know the type of nutrients that it requires or the soil that it grows in. But once you know those, I would still suggest that you have a fast composting method. So I produce about a cubic meter of compost in 28 days with the same method, flipping every 3 days, and
Right,
so on and so forth.
right.
There's also another method that I think would work with the grass, but this is what I would call the fine wine of composting, where it only uses soil and brown material. So if you have excess soil and you have a 50-50 mix of like brown
Okay.
material and soil, you just leave that
Right.
and water it, and it breaks down, and this produces a fungal compost that is very
Ah,
rich,
okay.
very potent, and it
Right,
will then connect. Like if you have a plot of cocoa trees, the
Right.
hyphae network from the fungi will basically
Right.
connect those trees into a network of cocoa producing, like it would be very good. But those are like, that's something that would take at least 2 to 3 years, and you need a very large amount to do. But in my opinion, from the knowledge, with the knowledge that I have now, I would think that would be the best long-term thing to do.
Okay, understood. Thank you.
You're welcome. I think, yes, the soil, the cocoa that is growing, it's important to understand as well.
So Nick,
Most things,
oh,
so
go on, sorry.
they're very, like, it's very important to understand the types of soil that we are talking about, because there are very, very different soil types that I won't get into today. You can easily research it, and then you can easily test to see what types of soil you have. Like if you have a red clay soil, if you have a loam or a sandy loam, because most of our islands, at least, are composed of different elements, and that will cause us to have different soils, especially if there's difference in elevation or rock type. So it's very important to see what type of soil you have, because with the ingredients, there are some composts that use crushed rock minerals, such as limestone. We don't need to use that in the Bahamas because our soil is predominantly a rocky soil. So we need something that holds more water and that has a better structure. If you have a clay soil, you may need like a sandier, or I wouldn't say sandier, but you would need a rockier compost, or a a different compost. And that just takes a little bit of research. What type of soil is here, and what type of things you can use in the compost. Rocks don't break down in the compost, but they add grit. So if you have like rock powder or a limestone powder, those are, or calcium carbonate, that's what it adds to the soil. But you don't want too much, but it still would be nice to have in places that have clay-like soil that's very hard for some trees to grow in.
Thanks, Nick. So I have one more question. So you mentioned how composting helped you to learn patience, and it was kind of therapeutic. Do you want to speak on that, like I guess the mental aspect, or emotional, or spiritual, or just how it could be relaxing, or how it could help you to calm down? Do you want to speak on that aspect of it, of composting?
Sure. So composting is a lot of hard work, because especially when you're dealing with composting on a scale like that I am, that pile that I showed you earlier used about 45 buckets, 45 5-gallon buckets, and each of those buckets weighed about 40 pounds. So it's very strenuous, and it's very long to it takes a while to chop all of that waste into a pulp. It takes a while to chop all of that waste down into a pulp, and whatever stresses you have, whatever is on your mind, you're not going to be thinking about that if you are doing this for 5 to 10 minutes. All of these things go away, especially when you have to make such a large pile. And as you create the pile, at least for me, there's some sense of accomplishment, knowing that I diverted these things from maybe the landfill, or picking up bags of leaves from the side of the road that are going to end up in the landfill, and I've created something that almost like an art piece to me. Another thing is flipping the pile like with a pitchfork. It gets hot, but you get to see how nature itself works. You get to see that this giant mass of decaying matter is transforming right before your eyes, and no matter what you do, it was going to break down anyway. But now you bear witness to something that has had no meaning to a lot of people, and it wasn't going to be of value to anything or to anyone. But now you're adding value to it, and you get to watch this process break down. I wouldn't say I had anger issues, but composting was just a very nice way to get out any extra steam or stress that I had from maybe school or things that were going on in my life, to just calm down and watch. A lot of people don't like to talk about death. It's a very touchy and sensitive topic. But the more I've composted, it's become something like I've gotten an appreciation for it, because you literally watch death create new life, and that new life is going on. You may not ever finish a compost pile to put around your plants, but you will see millions and millions and millions of bugs that have no purpose on their own, or but they all are part of this big system. They're breaking down the waste for you. They're working for you. When you're not flipping the pile, and when it's not hot, they're just eating and enjoying everything that you've given to them. And it's just a little humbling to see.
That's powerful, Nick. Thanks for that. It's closing up to 4 o'clock now. Do you have any final words? Anything you want to say to encourage people, and then also how people could reach out to you before we close out?
I would say just if you want to start composting, it may be hard, but the benefits are immense. They're countless. The I see some more questions, and that's really all I have to say. Soul and Soil, that's my company. I haven't really launched it as yet. I'm still getting a few things down, but you can follow me and you can follow my company on Instagram and Twitter, Soul and Soil Official and the Compost King. Those are both the Instagrams. And the Twitter is Soul and Soil Real. Yeah. And those are ways that you can contact me. If you have any other questions, I just want to say thank you all for listening to me talk for an hour. And I hope you got something very important from this. So thank you.
Thank you, Nicholas. Before
Thank
we do close up though, I wanted to just open the floor to any ambassadors if they wanted to say anything, they wanted to say what they learned, any feedback. The floor is yours. If anybody wants to speak, you could just open your mic.
Blessings and love, Nick. Thank you so much. This was a very, very informative talk. Thank you for talking to us for an hour about composting. I learned quite a bit, and I just wanted to plug that tomorrow is Sunday, and we're closing out on Caribbean Tree Planting Week. And your presentation kind of reminded me about the presentation that we're going to present tomorrow in terms of mental health and trees. I really loved how you opened your presentation with connecting with yourself first and then getting into the work of the soil. I thought that was beautiful, and it kind of just rang to the name of your NGO, Soul and Soil. And I just thought, you should come through tomorrow if you have the time. It starts at 10 a.m. Jamaica time, which is 11 a.m. EDT. So
Okay.
whoever has contact, I could send them the information, or you could just exchange contact with us here, and I could just send over that information to you. But I just wanted you to know that I really appreciate it, and thank you for your energy, and we'll be applying what you've learned. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Jamila. Thank you.
Blessings.
Thanks a lot, Jamila. If anybody else wants to speak, now's the time. If not, I'd like to welcome Sean to come on to the stage and just to give a few final words on behalf of the ambassadors. Sean, you might be muted if you're talking. Okay, while we wait on Sean, if Sean won't be able to unmute, I will just wrap up now. I just want to first thank everybody for joining us today for our first training session, for listening to Nicholas to support him, and thank you, Nicholas, for coming on today, for sharing your passion. I've known you for several years, and I know how passionate you are about this, and it was good to see, and for others to see that, and for you to have an impact on people. And so I appreciate that. And I'm happy that so many ambassadors were able to come on today. And I hope that people and folks were able to get some value out of your presentation. Like Jamila said, there is one more day of Caribbean Tree Planting Week, which is tomorrow, which will be streamed on Facebook at 11 a.m. Eastern Time, and 10 a.m. Jamaica time, and I think that's 12 p.m. Trinidad time. I think I'm right. There's so many time zones. But thanks again to everyone, and I hope you all have a good weekend.
Same to you. Blessings.
Thanks.
All right, thank you.
Weekend
Thanks,
too.
everyone. Not sure what happened to Sean. I know he had to try and reach up to Mr. Blackman's for the other event. So I don't know if we lost him.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
it's
actually.
Oh, look, he's here. Okay, could do the call to action, Sean.
Yes. Let me just get back into my car.
While Sean is prepping to just do our call for action, I just want to specifically thank Nicholas as well. Nicholas, it was quite phenomenal, as Jim Miller said, for you to, cohesively bring all the things together with regard to people being able to experience this new type of way of learning, and also tying it to mental health and self-awareness. So I really appreciate all that you did today, and we hope we could work with you in future to have more training sessions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I look forward to working with you guys in the future.
And yeah, Talia, for Nicholas, he's been planting some trees in the Bahamas. So he's been working with us. It just wasn't, I guess, as visible or as known. But he's participated in a few tree planting
plantings.
activities. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah. I like
Glad
to.
it's glad to see it growing.
Yes. Yes. I like to stay in the background when I'm out planting trees. It's fun. It's really fun. I like talking to all the people out there and just hearing their reasons for planting trees and coming out.
Yeah, I think being on the ground and witnessing it happening, and as you said, interacting with all the different types of people from all different social and classes and income brackets, it's quite amazing to see everybody's feedback on why they think it's important, from simple things to, they planted it because they need to generate some secondary income, to understanding that, we need it for climate mitigation and all the different things that we know the benefits of tree planting is. The
Yes.
second leg of it is to see how we can start, capturing these moments, all these nice moments that we are that are happening through the project.
Yes. Even while I was in university, I studied photojournalism and nature photography. It's not something that I do often, but that would be something that I would love to just share what I know about that. And so we could start capturing those moments.
Totally agreed. Okay, Sean, are you ready? I know you had some internet issues. I don't know if we lost him again. Testing. Sean McCoon.
I guess he wasn't able to join in. Well, I guess, Talia, did you want to do a call to action, or if not,
Hey,
that's
Okay,
hey,
he's back.
Sean.
Go ahead, Sean.
Right. Hey guys, my apologies again. So this is a call to action, yes? So this is a call to action for everybody to get involved with the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance's push for having an official Caribbean Tree Planting Week. We urge everybody to sign the letter, and we urge everybody to get their governments, get their civil society groups, get their private sector groups involved, so that we can have that letter signed and have an official and a recognized Caribbean Tree Planting Week. All right. I am Sean McCoon. I am the Caribbean Tree Planting Ambassador for Tobago. And I want to just say that this has been an awesome experience. And I encourage everybody to tell your friends, your family, and everybody else around you about the work that the Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance has been doing. I, as part of the Trinidad and Tobago contingent, Plant Your Roots, we are very happy to be involved with this. And we also encourage you to visit our social media spaces, which would be CariPhilTT, Plant Your Roots, and our Instagram page as well. You can also visit our website at www.CariPhilAlliance.org. Again, CariPhilAlliance.org. And we encourage you to sign up, register with us, come to some of our events, and tell everybody about that letter to the Caribbean government to have recognized a Caribbean Tree Planting Week. Also, you can purchase official Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance t-shirts from our partners, Alba of Denmark. All right, so they are one of our supporting partners and playing a very, very key role in this entire initiative regionally. And we ask that you look them up, check them out on the internet, and we want to just recognize their contribution to this entire initiative regionally. So thank you guys. Again, Sean McCoon here, Caribbean Philanthropic Alliance Tree Planting Ambassador from Tobago, Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you again. And we urge everybody to get involved in any shape or form that you can.
Thanks so much, Sean. Thanks again, everyone, for joining us. Like Sean said, sign the petition, buy a shirt, support the Alliance, tell a friend, plant a tree, start composting, anything, any one of those, all of those, support us, get involved. There's so many different ways you could get involved. Reach out if you're interested, and we hope to hear from some of you soon. And I hope everyone has a good weekend and that you remember to tune in tomorrow to our last day of the Caribbean Tree Planting Week. That will be about mental health. So I just want to thank everyone again, and good afternoon.
Bye, everyone. It was great.
Blessings,
Take care, everybody. See you guys in a while.
Yes, enough love.
On the horizon, plant some seeds, plant it in and out of season, plant some trees, it's time to start the mission, plant some seeds, oh, yo. Politicians don't have the answer, we change them every time, even though we make the change. Solution. We later lost the truth. We need this revolution. We later lost the truth. We control our destiny. The only solution is production and the science of self-reliance. Plant some trees. Plant some trees. Food crisis on the horizon. Plant some